This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India-Russia bilateral ties. The participants are Anil Kumar Trigunayat, former diplomat, and Anubhai Rodki, anchor.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a two-day visit to Russia where he will attend the 22nd India-Russia Annual Summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. To discuss the significance of this visit, I am now joined by former diplomat Anil Kumar Trigunayat. Mr. Trigunayat, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
The visit to Russia is Prime Minister Modi's first bilateral visit of his new term in office. In his last two terms, his first visits were to a neighboring country, Bhutan in 2014 and Maldives and Sri Lanka in 2019. How significant is this moving away from a past tradition, so to speak?
In diplomacy, there is really no tradition in that sense of the term unless you really make one keeping in mind. But today, Prime Minister Modi, if you remember, that during his inauguration and the oath-taking ceremony, he had invited all our neighborhood friends. I mean, there were President of Bangladesh, from Nepal, from Bhutan, and from Sri Lanka, as well as from important Indian Ocean countries, including Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. So neighborhood first is always there, and Prime Minister Modi has already met them. And then we had after that a visit of the Bangladesh Prime Minister as well. He went to G7 because that was very immediately planned, and thereafter, now this happens to be his first bilateral visit. This is the visit of Prime Minister Modi after 2019 when he had gone to Vladivostok for the Far Eastern Economic Forum where he was the chief guest, and then President Putin had come here in 21 for the summit, and since then we did not have any summits. Plus this visit is also taking place after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. So it's a summit level discussion between India and Russia, and it started in 2001. Prime Minister Modi, this would be his ninth, I think, the 22nd summit, in which this will be the ninth time that he'll be participating in it.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that Moscow is expecting a very important visit and that Russian-Indian relations are at the level of strategic partnership. This statement, in a way, underlines the importance that Moscow also attaches to its relations with India.
Of course, Moscow and President Putin personally. I mean, I have been there since 2000 when he became Prime Minister, then the President Putin, and since then he has been very heavily invested in cultivating the relationship with India, and it has been equally invested, our leaders have been equally invested in the leadership relationship, and so is Prime Minister Modi. I mean, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have a tremendous relationship, a personal chemistry, and this, in any case, this relationship is a very deep and diversified and trusted relationship. It is not something that just happens yesterday, today. It's a historic past, and that past has continued, whereby each one has supported the other to a great extent. Of course, there are differences of opinion on various major issues, but at the same time, there is a relationship which goes from defense, security, to cyber security, to space, to nuclear energy, to climate change, to all kinds of major global challenges and others. So I think that this is a unique partnership that we have with Russia, and this is called a special and privileged strategic partnership.
The total trade between New Delhi and Moscow in the last financial year rose to $65 billion. However, India's exports to Russia in that accounted for only $4 billion. Would you say that correcting this trade deficit is likely to be an important issue of discussion? And what are the areas in which India will seek to push its exports to Russia?
Well, trade is not either a one-way street, nor it is a balancing street. It depends on requirements of the countries. We import nearly 80-90% of our hydrocarbons requirements. And Russia has emerged as the major exporter of crude oil to us. And therefore, this trade imbalance that you are witnessing. We were fighting somehow, both the countries, to take the trade beyond $10 billion, although the various targets were set like $30 billion and all that. But we have not reached that. But just due to the import of oil, about 2 million barrels a day, it has become possible that trade is increasing $65 billion. Yes, of course, correcting the trade imbalance is a priority for the Indian government. Now it will depend on our Indian businesses essentially as to how do they take advantage of the Russian opportunity. Of course, we have been good in financial down. We should start in the services sector. The Russians are also asking for more Indian manpower to be there. They are also looking at possibility of investments in Far East, where they've invited pharmaceutical is one area in which we have tremendous possibility, and we have been very much present there. So we'll have to be innovative in that. But so far, this relationship has been mainly dependent. I mean, the ballooning of the trade deficit that you are seeing is essentially because of the large scale of crude imports.
And when we talk about the trade deficit, a lot of it is also to do with the rupee ruble equation that is there. So do you think that is also going to be a point of discussion?
Oh, yes, that is one of the issues which is quite important to smoothen out this mechanism of rupee ruble trade. And no doubt that there has been a substantial surplus that has been there. There have been discussions exactly how India can pay back, how the rupee ruble trade and the surplus rupees can be utilized. As you know, India is a major opportunity in infrastructure and defense and other areas in which the Russians should find it more attractive to invest their surplus funds. And this also provides them a strategic possibility, essentially, to enhance their footprint. And I hope they take it. Of course, what I understand is that recent reports indicate that these issues have been sorted out to a great extent, but there is a requirement of more innovative solutions, and I'm quite sure those will be talked about during the visit.
Russia has become an important partner for India's energy security in the last couple of years, as you just mentioned, the import of Russian crude, and it has always been a major supplier of defense equipment for India. So, continued procurement of discounted Russian crude oil and expediting delayed deliveries of defense equipment, including the remainder of S-400 missile defense systems, will be high on the agenda.
Yes, very much so. The thing with defense and security cooperation has been one of the major pedestals of our engagement with Russia and Soviet Union before. And about 70% of Indian equipment used to be imported from Russia. And over time, we have tried to indigenize quite significantly. And I think there's an opportunity to do a little more in this area. Now, Russia-Ukraine war, of course, is taking some toll on the supplies of spares and delays of deliveries that is happening. And I'm quite sure those are talked about. They will be discussed if there are any specific single issue. Normally what happens, we have two joint commissions with them. One is which discusses normal trade and technology and other things. Third one is essentially, the second one is basically military technical cooperation and various issues in which all these supplies and other things are discussed. So they are held before the visit of the Prime Minister or the President from Russia, whenever that happens. And therefore, they would have already sorted out these issues. But if there are any key issues that remain there, those are discussed by the leaders.
You just mentioned the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, this is Mr. Modi's first visit to Moscow since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began in 2022. India has maintained that the conflict must be resolved through diplomacy and dialogue. The Prime Minister has also said that this is not an era of war. And he recently met Ukrainian President Zelensky during the G7 summit. Is this issue likely to be discussed?
Yeah, it is normal for the leaders to discuss bilateral issues, regional issues, and the global issues. Now, of course, Russia-Ukraine war, Prime Minister Modi has been talking to President Putin as well as President Zelensky several times. He met President Zelensky in Italy during the Puglia G7 summit. And Italy has been asking India to play a greater role in bringing about some kind of a cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, or peace. And Prime Minister Modi, as you rightly mentioned, has said that dialogue and diplomacy as well as the respect for the UN Charter are extremely important. So India's stand is principle. Prime Minister Modi told President Putin in Samarkand on the sidelines of the SU summit that this is not an era of war, and President Putin appreciated. The fact remains is that President Putin, before the Swiss summit on Ukraine, had offered some peace plan, which was of course rejected by the Western countries. And now Ukraine is going to come up with some sort. Prime Minister Modi will have a complete picture of both sides in his mind, and if possible, to work as some kind of a help diffuse the tensions. That will call that will be taken later because both sides trust Prime Minister Modi and India.
Another important issue from India's point of view is the early discharge of Indian nationals who have been misled into the service of the Russian army. Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra in his briefing mentioned that this is expected to figure during the talks.
Well, Indian diaspora's welfare is always high on the Indian government's agenda, has been there. But at the same time, this will also be taken, of course, by Prime Minister Modi because just that 10 or 12 people who are left, I'm told, out of the total 50 who were recruited. But the fact remains is that we have to be extremely watchful that we don't send our people to the conflict zones when they're going and they're duped by various agencies and agents who are manpower agents services that they just send them and how they are sending a nexus with them. So it requires a lot of controlling at home as well. So I think that this is a holistic process, but for the release of the remaining people from the services in the army, and of course it's not a done thing, but we have to see, make it a holistic picture, whether it is from India, and take that kind of a solution forward, that they do not at all fall into that trap.
Apart from the issues that we have just now discussed, what are the other topics that are likely to be on the table when Prime Minister Modi meets President Putin?
Well, I think that discussions will be also held about the India-China relations, China-Pakistan nexus, about Afghanistan as well, and of course our space cooperation, nuclear cooperation. There are many. I mean, this relationship is the most comprehensive relationship. And of course, the issues pertaining to Indo-Pacific, India has a certain position, the Western countries have other position, Russia has its own position. So all those issues will come up. More importantly, the war in the Middle East will also figure out. So I think that this will be a visit full of agenda, both bilateral, but the focus remains essentially on the bilateral issues.
The Russian president recently made a state visit to China, and later he hailed the friendship between Moscow and Beijing during his meeting with the Chinese president Xi Jinping at the SCO summit. In this context, how significant is Prime Minister Modi's Russia visit?
Well, I think that there is no doubt that Russia-China relationship is strategic and is driven by their own balance of power equation with the West. But I believe that their relationship with India is based on a very different kind of a modus operandi. There's, of course, India is a very major power, and President Putin has many times praised the leadership of Prime Minister Modi as well as India's ongoing reforms and becoming an attractive destination and the growing superpower, at least economically, has very much figured in their prospect. And I think that strategically, Russians also think that although they need China in order to counter the Western hegemony, or as they call it, but in order to want to counter eventually the Chinese hegemony, they will need India. And that's why India is in a sweet place to act as a friend and a trusted partner for the Russians.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, while talking about Prime Minister's visit to Russia, he said that West is closely watching Prime Minister Modi's upcoming visit to Russia. How do you take that statement?
Well, that is their outlook. I think each country will be looking at this visit in a different way. But my view is that everybody by now understands that India believes in its own strategic autonomy. It treats each relationship on its own stand and works very closely with them. Now, from the Russian point of view, obviously, it will make out to be like that. But then India's role is not only limited to being seen this way or that way, it's also to bring about peace and stability in the region.
President Putin and Prime Minister Modi have met 16 times in the past. How will their personal chemistry, as you said, how will their personal chemistry impact this bilateral visit?
Well, not only the bilateral visit, their own bilaterally, of course, they can resolve any issues while they are sitting together, frankly and freely talk. And that's the reason Prime Minister Modi was able to tell President Putin that this is not an area of war and we must end this war. So this only happens when there are friends whom one each other trusts and likes. And President Putin's statements, if you just go back by 1 year and you see how illogically he has talked about Prime Minister Modi and India's growth pattern and trajectory. And I think that is very important. And Prime Minister Modi also has in his departure statement, I'm looking forward to see my friend. So this makes a great difference. And today the diplomacy is conducted at the highest level. And when the leaders have confidence in one another, the diplomacy mostly succeeds.
Mr. Trigunath, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India-Russia bilateral ties. The participants were Anil Kumar Trigunath, former diplomat, and Anubha Rodki, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsttalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.